Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel UES Defiance as it drifted through the dark space near the edge of human territory. The stars looked different out here where few humans had traveled before. His crew had been mapping this sector for 3 months and they were getting ready to head home when something appeared on their sensors that changed everything. Chief Engineer Lisa Martinez called out from her station with excitement in her voice. She had found something that did not belong in empty space. The object was small and sleek and moving in a pattern that no natural asteroid would follow. It was clearly made by someone with intelligence and technology. Jake ordered his ship closer to the strange object. As they approached, it became clear that this was some kind of probe or scout vessel. The design was unlike anything humans had ever built. Its surface was smooth and seemed to shift colors as they watched. The propulsion system showed no visible engines or exhaust, but it moved with perfect control through space. Lisa worked at her console trying to understand the alien technology. She was one of the best engineers in the human fleet and had never seen anything like this before. The probe seemed to be scanning their ship while they were scanning it. After several hours of careful work, she managed to establish a basic communication link with the alien device. Data began flowing into their computer systems. The information was vast and complex, but their translation programs slowly began to make sense of it. What they learned made the entire crew go silent with shock and worry. The Kier probe contained a message from something called the Karathi Empire. These aliens had been watching humanity for many years from a distance. They knew about Earth and the human colonies and had been studying human technology and culture. The message was formal and sounded like it came from someone who thought they were much better than humans. The Karathi called humans a developing species with primitive potential. They offered to bring humanity into their empire as what they called a client race. In exchange for human labor and resources, they would provide advanced technology and guidance. They made it sound like they were doing humans a great favor by offering this deal. Jake read the message several times and felt his anger growing. The aliens wrote about humans like they were children who needed adult supervision. They claimed their empire was peaceful and prosperous and that joining would benefit everyone. But something about the tone of the message felt wrong to him. Lisa continued working with the alien data and discovered something troubling. Hidden in the information were detailed star maps showing the locations of human colonies that were supposed to be secret. The maps showed mining operations and military bases that only a few people in Earth Command knew about. The probe had been collecting intelligence on human defenses and resources while delivering its diplomatic message. This was not a friendly first contact but preparation for something much more serious. The Karathi had been spying on humanity for much longer than they admitted in their message. Jake called together his senior officers to discuss what they had learned. Navigation Officer Tony Blake pointed out that the alien maps were incredibly detailed and up-to-date. Someone had been watching human expansion very carefully and for a very long time. Communication specialist Amy Foster noted that the message seemed designed to make humans feel grateful for being noticed by such an advanced civilization. Dr. Kevin Park, the ship's science officer, studied the biological data included in the YO alien transmission. The Karathi appeared to be tall, crystalline beings who had modified their own genetics over many generations. They communicated through harmonic frequencies and considered themselves the most advanced species in the galaxy. The more the crew studied the alien information, the more concerned they became. The Karathi Empire claimed to have uplifted dozens of other species over the centuries. Each time they offered the same deal that they were now offering to humanity. Join the Empire and receive technological advancement in exchange for serving the greater good. Jake realized that this was not really an offer but an ultimatum delivered with polite words. The Karathi expected humans to surrender their independence and become part of their empire. The alternative was probably conquest by force. The probe was testing human defenses while delivering the message to see how easily Earth could be taken, if diplomacy failed. Lisa discovered that the probe was transmitting everything it learned back to the Karathi Empire through some kind of faster-than-light communication system. The aliens now knew the exact capabilities of human ships and weapons. They knew how many vessels Earth could deploy and where the major military bases were located. The crew worked through the night analyzing every piece of data from the alien probe. What they found painted a picture of an empire that had been expanding across the galaxy for thousands of years. The Karathi collected species like humans, collected specimens and added them to their civilization, whether they wanted to join or not. Jake made the decision to capture the probe before it could transmit any more intelligence back to its creators. Lisa used an electromagnetic pulse to disable its communication system, and then brought it aboard the Defiance for detailed study. They needed to learn everything they could about Karathi technology before the aliens arrived in force. The probe's internal systems revealed the location of the Karathi fleet that was already moving toward human space. According to the navigation data, massive alien ships would arrive at Earth in less than 4 weeks. The diplomatic message had been sent ahead to give humans time to consider surrender before the fleet arrived to enforce the Empire's will. Jake ordered his ship to return to Earth at maximum speed. Humanity needed to prepare for the arrival of aliens who saw them as nothing more than primitive subjects to be absorbed into their empire. The Karathi had made a serious mistake, though. They had underestimated human intelligence and determination by treating them like children who would be grateful for alien guidance. As the Defiance raced toward Earth with its captured alien technology and vital intelligence, Jake knew that everything was about to change for humanity. The age of human isolation in the galaxy was ending, and what came next would determine whether his species remained free or became slaves to an alien empire that thought it knew what was best for everyone. 3 weeks after Commander Jake Morrison brought news of the aliens to Earth, massive ships appeared at the edge of the solar system. The Karathi fleet was larger and more impressive than anything humans had ever imagined. The lead vessel was the size of a small moon, and its hull seemed to be made of living crystal that pulsed with internal light. President Helen Carter stood in the Emergency Command Center beneath Washington, along with Admiral Frank Rodriguez and other world leaders. They watched the alien fleet through long-range sensors and felt very small and helpless. The Karathi had brought enough firepower to destroy every human settlement in space without breaking stride. The alien commander sent a formal message to Earth requesting permission to enter orbit for diplomatic negotiations. High Commander Zektar introduced himself as the voice of the Karathi Empire and expressed hope for peaceful cooperation between their civilizations. His words were polite, but carried the unmistakable tone of someone who expected complete obedience. Dr. Kevin Park had spent the past 3 weeks studying the captured probe and everything it revealed about Karathi biology and culture. The aliens were tall, graceful beings with crystalline skin that could change color to reflect their emotions. They communicated through harmonic frequencies that created beautiful music, but also served as a complex language more precise than human speech. What worried Dr. Park most was what he learned about Karathi genetic modification. The aliens had been changing their own biology for thousands of years to enhance their intelligence and remove what they considered flaws. They had eliminated aggression, creativity, and unpredictability from their nature in favor of perfect logic and efficiency. The Karathi delegation arrived at the space station orbiting Earth in shuttlecraft that moved without any visible propulsion. High Commander Zektar was nearly 8 feet tall with skin that shifted between deep blue and silver. His harmonics translated into a voice that sounded like singing crystal and made human ears ring with each word. During the first diplomatic meeting, Zektar explained that the Karathi Empire controlled over 400 star systems across the galaxy. They had encountered and uplifted 46 different species over the millennia, bringing peace and prosperity to civilizations that had been struggling with war and poverty. Humanity would be the 47th species to join their growing family. President Carter asked what would be expected of humans who joined the Empire. Zektar's response was delivered with the patience of an adult, explaining simple concepts to children. Humans would contribute their labor and resources to the greater good, while receiving advanced technology and guidance from their Karathi supervisors. Individual human governments would be replaced with more efficient administrative systems designed by imperial experts. Admiral Rodriguez wanted to know what would happen if humanity chose to remain independent. Zektar's crystalline skin flickered red for a moment before returning to calm blue. He explained that isolation was not beneficial for developing species. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and only through unity under Karathi leadership could primitive civilizations hope to survive and prosper. Dr. Park noticed that the alien commander never answered the question directly. Instead, he spoke about historical examples of species that had chosen cooperation over conflict and thrived under imperial guidance. The message was clear enough without being stated openly. Join willingly, or be forced to join through other means. Tatir. Negotiations continued for several days while the Karathi fleet waited patiently in orbit around Earth. More alien ships arrived each day until the solar system contained the largest military force in human history. The aliens seemed to enjoy displaying their overwhelming technological superiority. Engineer Lisa Martinez worked with a team of scientists to analyze Karathi technology from the captured probe. What they discovered was both impressive and frightening. The aliens possessed energy shields that could absorb and redirect any weapon humans could deploy. Their faster-than-light drives could move ships across the galaxy in days rather than years. Most disturbing of all, their weapons could destroy planets from a safe distance. During one meeting, Zektar demonstrated Karathi power by effortlessly disabling the Mars defense platform that protected human mining operations. The massive military installation simply stopped working when the alien commander sent a harmonic signal from his ship. Every weapon system, communication array, and life support system shut down simultaneously without any visible attack. The demonstration sent shockwaves through human military leadership. If the Karathi could disable their most advanced defenses with a simple signal, what hope did Earth have of resisting imperial demands? The aliens had made their point very clearly without actually destroying anything or killing anyone. President Carter called an emergency session of the World Council to decide humanity's response to the alien ultimatum. Some leaders argued for immediate surrender, pointing out that resistance would only lead to unnecessary death and destruction. Others insisted that freedom was worth fighting for, no matter how impossible victory seemed. Jake Morrison attended the council meeting as the officer who had first encountered the Karathi probe. He argued that the aliens' confidence might be their weakness. They expected humans to behave logically and surrender when faced with superior force. But humans were not always logical, and their unpredictability might provide some advantage. Dr. Park presented his analysis of Karathi biology and culture to the council. The aliens had achieved perfection in their own minds by eliminating chaos and creativity from their nature. They could not understand species that valued individual freedom over collective efficiency. This made them powerful but also limited in ways they did not recognize. Lisa Martinez explained that Karathi technology was incredibly advanced, but also highly specialized. Their energy shields were designed to counter the weapons used by other galactic civilizations. Their communication systems assumed all intelligent species would use harmonic frequencies. Their ships were built for overwhelming displays of force rather than adaptable combat. The final debate came down to a simple question. Would humanity surrender its independence to guarantee survival? Or would they fight for freedom even if defeat seemed certain? The vote was close, but President Carter cast the deciding ballot in favor of resistance. Zektar received the human response with what seemed like genuine sadness. His crystalline skin pulsed with deep purple colors as he explained that the Karathi Empire had hoped for peaceful cooperation. Violence was inefficient and wasteful, but sometimes necessary when dealing with primitive species who could not see the benefits of imperial membership. The alien commander gave humanity 72 hours to reconsider their decision. After that time, the Karathi fleet would begin the process of bringing human civilization into the Empire through more direct methods. He expressed confidence that humans would eventually understand that resistance had been futile, and joining the Empire was in everyone's best interest. As the alien delegation returned to their massive ships, human military forces prepared for a war they could not hope to win through conventional means. The Karathi Empire commanded technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans possessed. But Jake Morrison and his crew had learned something important during their encounter with the alien probe. Sometimes the most advanced civilizations made assumptions that could be turned against them by species they considered too primitive to matter. The 72-hour deadline was approaching fast, and the Karathi fleet had moved into attack formation around Earth. High Commander Zektar sent one final message offering humanity a last chance to surrender before the Empire's patience ran out. President Carter's response was short and clear. Humans would rather die free than live as slaves. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance as it led a small fleet of human vessels toward the massive alien ships. Every person in the solar system knew this was probably a suicide mission, but they were determined to show the galaxy that humanity would not go quietly into imperial servitude. Engineer Lisa Martinez had spent the past 3 days working with weapons specialist Tony Blake and Dr. Kevin Park to find some weakness in Karathi technology. What they discovered gave humanity its only hope of survival. The aliens had designed their defenses to counter the energy weapons used by other galactic civilizations, but they had never encountered human innovations in kinetic warfare. The Karathi energy shields could absorb and redirect laser beams, plasma bolts, and particle weapons with perfect efficiency. But the shields were not designed to handle physical objects moving at extreme velocity. Lisa had modified mining charges and magnetic accelerator weapons to exploit this oversight in alien defensive systems. Communication specialist Amy Foster had made an even more important discovery while studying the captured probe's data systems. The Karathi used quantum entanglement for instant communication across their empire, but their network protocols were based on harmonic frequencies that assumed all users would follow proper procedures. Amy had found a way to inject chaotic signals into their communication system that would disrupt coordination between ships. Jake's plan was simple in concept but required perfect timing to execute. The human fleet would approach the alien ships using unconventional tactics borrowed from ancient naval warfare. Instead of trying to match Karathi firepower, they would use speed and unpredictability to get close enough for kinetic weapons to be effective. The battle began when the Karathi fleet detected human ships accelerating toward their positions. Zektar seemed genuinely puzzled by this development. His harmonics translated as confused disappointment that humans would choose destruction over the benefits of Imperial membership. He ordered his ships to disable the human vessels without destroying them completely. Karathi energy weapons reached out across space toward the approaching human fleet. Brilliant beams of concentrated power struck human shields and armor, but the ships kept coming. Lisa had reinforced their hulls with layers of ablative materials that could survive at least a few hits from alien weapons. The humans were not trying to win a long fight, but to survive long enough to get close. The first surprise came when human ships began releasing clouds of metal debris and chaff that confused Karathi targeting systems. The aliens had expected humans to fight like other galactic civilizations with organized formations and predictable tactics. Instead, they faced swarming attacks that seemed to have no coherent strategy. Tony Blake's modified kinetic weapons began, finding their targets as human ships closed the distance. Magnetic accelerators fired chunks of dense metal at significant fractions of light speed, directly at Karathi hulls. The alien energy shields tried to absorb the projectiles, but physical matter could not be redirected like energy beams. Karathi ships began taking damage for the first time in centuries. Amy Foster activated her virus program that flooded the alien communication network with chaotic quantum signals. The Karathi fleet had been perfectly coordinated until suddenly their ships could not talk to each other properly. Orders became garbled and response time slowed as harmonics were drowned out by random noise. Zektar tried to restore communication discipline, but his own crew was struggling to adapt to the chaos. The Karathi had eliminated unpredictability from their nature so completely that they could not function effectively when their perfect systems were disrupted. They kept trying to follow standard procedures even when those procedures were no longer working. Jake ordered his ship directly toward the massive alien flagship, while smaller human vessels continued their swarming attacks. The Defiance had been modified with an experimental fusion drive that could provide enormous thrust for short periods. Lisa had calculated that they could use the drive system itself as a kinetic weapon if they could get close enough to the enemy command ship. The Dew Karathi fleet began to panic as their technological advantages proved useless against human tactics they had never imagined. Energy shields that had protected them from galactic threats for millennia were worthless against chunks of metal moving at relativistic speeds. Communication systems that had coordinated vast fleets across the galaxy were overwhelmed by simple noise. Dr. Park watched the battle from the command center on Earth and realized that humanity was witnessing something unprecedented. The Karathi Empire had conquered dozens of species using the same tactics and technologies, but every previous enemy had tried to fight the aliens using conventional methods that played to Karathi strengths. Humans were the first species chaotic and creative enough to ignore the rules of galactic warfare. They used improvised weapons and unpredictable tactics because they had never learned the proper way to conduct space battles. Their ignorance of accepted military doctrine had become their greatest advantage. The turning point came when Jake's ship reached ramming distance of the alien flagship. Zektar finally understood what the human commander intended and tried to maneuver his massive vessel away from the approaching threat. But Karathi ships were designed for overwhelming displays of force rather than quick maneuvering, and the flagship could not avoid collision. The Defiant struck the alien command ship with its fusion drive at maximum output. The impact created a brilliant explosion that could be seen from Earth with the naked eye. Both vessels were destroyed instantly, but the psychological effect on the Karathi fleet was devastating. Their invincible flagship had been destroyed by a primitive human ship using nothing more than speed and determination. Karathi ships began withdrawing from Earth orbit as their commanders struggled to understand what had happened. They had brought enough firepower to conquer a dozen worlds but had been defeated by tactics so simple that no civilized species would consider using them. The humans had won by refusing to fight fair. Amy Foster's communication virus continued, spreading through the alien network, carrying news of the impossible human victory to Karathi forces throughout the galaxy. For the first time in their history, the Empire had been defeated in battle by a species they considered primitive. The implications of this defeat would echo across hundreds of star systems. High Commander Zektar had survived the destruction of his flagship, but his authority was shattered along with Karathi confidence. He sent a final message to Earth acknowledging that humans had proven themselves worthy of independence. The Empire would withdraw and leave humanity alone to develop on their own path. But Jake Morrison's sacrifice had accomplished more than just driving off the invasion fleet. The human victory had shown the galaxy that the Karathi Empire was not invincible. Species that had been conquered and absorbed over the centuries began to remember what freedom felt like and wonder if they too could break free from imperial control. As rescue ships searched the debris field for survivors, President Carter realized that humanity had not just won a battle, but had started something much larger. The Karathi Empire was built on the assumption that technological superiority guaranteed victory. Humans had proven that assumption wrong, and that proof would spread to every corner of the galaxy. News of the human victory spread across the galaxy through the same communication networks that Amy Foster had compromised during the battle. The Karathi Empire had spent centuries building a reputation of invincibility, but that reputation crumbled overnight when word reached the hundreds of conquered worlds under imperial control. Colonel Steve Warren led a diplomatic mission to 12 different star systems where client species had begun questioning their relationship with the Karathi Empire. What he found was a galaxy full of civilizations that had forgotten their own cultures and identities after generations of imperial guidance. But the human victory had awakened something in them that the Karathi thought had been permanently erased. The first rebellion began in the Nethera system, where an aquatic species had been forced to abandon their ocean cities and move to artificial habitats designed by Karathi engineers. The Nethera had once been master architects who built magnificent underwater civilizations, but the Empire had declared their traditional construction methods inefficient and dangerous. Dr. Kevin Park traveled to the Nethera homeworld with a team of scientists to document what the Karathi had done to these people. What he discovered was cultural genocide on a massive scale. The aliens had systematically replaced Nethera art, music, literature, and technology with standardized imperial alternatives that were supposedly better for everyone. The Nethera, showed Dr. Park the ruins of their ancient cities that lay abandoned beneath the waves. Magnificent structures that had stood for thousands of years were left to decay, while the population lived in sterile habitats that looked exactly like imperial facilities on dozens of other worlds. The Karathi had erased everything that made the Nathara unique and special. But the human victory had reminded the Nathara that resistance was possible. Young Nathara, who had never seen their ancestral cities, began diving to the ocean floor to explore the ruins. They found libraries of choral books that contained their people's real history and art galleries filled with sculptures that expressed their true nature rather than imperial ideals. Similar awakenings were happening throughout the galaxy as species began to remember who they had been before the Karathi arrived. The silicon-based Velkorians started growing crystal gardens that had been banned for being unproductive. The energy beings called Lumari began singing their traditional songs instead of the harmonic frequencies imposed by imperial culture. Colonel Warren discovered that every client species had been told the same story when they joined the Empire. The Karathi claimed to be uplifting primitive civilizations by sharing advanced technology and removing cultural barriers to progress. But what they were really doing was collecting diversity that they had lost through their own genetic modifications. The Karathi had once been as chaotic and creative as humans, but they had modified those traits out of their biology in pursuit of perfect efficiency. Now they needed the diversity of thought and culture that they had systematically destroyed. They collected client species like a desperate addict seeking something that could never satisfy their craving. Dr. Park's research team made an even more disturbing discovery on the Karathi homeworld. Hidden beneath the crystal cities were vast archives containing genetic samples and cultural artifacts from every species the Empire had encountered. The Karathi were trying to artificially recreate the creativity they had eliminated from themselves by studying conquered civilizations. The Empire's leaders lived in increasing isolation as their perfect society became more sterile and lifeless with each generation. They envied the very traits they had spent centuries trying to eliminate from the galaxy. The uplifting program was not about helping primitive species, but about stealing what the Karathi had lost forever. As rebellions spread across imperial space, it became clear that the Karathi military was not equipped to handle multiple conflicts simultaneously. Their tactics and strategies assumed that enemies would fight according to accepted galactic norms. When faced with species using their own unique approaches to warfare, the imperial forces found themselves overwhelmed. The Velkorians used their natural ability to phase through solid matter to infiltrate Karathi installations. The Nathara flooded imperial facilities with precisely controlled water attacks that disabled equipment without harming personnel. The Lumari disrupted Karathi communication networks by broadcasting songs that interfered with harmonic frequencies. Each species developed resistance methods based on their own nature and abilities, rather than trying to copy human tactics. The galaxy was discovering that there were as many ways to fight the Empire as there were species willing to resist imperial control. The Karathi found themselves facing enemies they could not understand or predict. President Helen Carter authorized Operation Catalyst, a plan to provide strategic support to rebelling systems while establishing Earth as a coordination center for the growing resistance movement. Human ships began appearing in distant star systems carrying supplies and technical assistance for species that were fighting for their freedom. Engineer Lisa Martinez worked with alien engineers to develop new technologies that combined the best innovations from multiple species. Human kinetic weapons were improved with Velkorian phase technology. Nathara architectural principles were applied to spacecraft design. Lumari energy manipulation enhanced communication systems. The collaborative approach produced technological advances that surpassed even Karathi achievements. The Empire had always forced client species to abandon their unique knowledge in favor of standardized imperial science. But when different species worked together while maintaining their individual strengths, the results were revolutionary. Amy Foster established a galaxy-wide communication network that allowed resistance groups to coordinate their activities without using Karathi infrastructure. The network was deliberately chaotic and redundant, with multiple backup systems that made it impossible for Imperial forces to shut down completely. As the Empire began losing control of its outer territories, Karathi leaders made increasingly desperate attempts to maintain their authority. They sent massive fleets to crush rebellions but found that overwhelming force was useless against enemies who refused to fight conventional battles. Every victory was temporary, and every defeat encouraged more systems to join the resistance. The final blow came when the Karathi homeworld itself began experiencing internal unrest. Younger generations of Karathi who had grown up hearing about diverse galactic cultures started questioning why their own society was so rigid and uniform. They wanted to experience the creativity and chaos that their ancestors had eliminated. Dr. Park was on the Karathi homeworld when the first protests began. Young Karathi gathered in the crystal plazas singing discordant songs and creating art that violated every principle of imperial aesthetics. They were trying to reclaim the very traits that the Empire had spent centuries trying to destroy throughout the galaxy. The older Karathi leadership faced an impossible choice. They could use force against their own people to maintain order, but that would prove they were no different from the primitive species they claimed to be helping. Or they could allow the chaos to continue and watch their perfect society dissolve into the kind of creative anarchy they had always feared. Within months of the human victory at Earth, the Karathi Empire was collapsing from within as much as from external rebellions. Species throughout the galaxy were rediscovering their own cultures, while the Karathi themselves were finally admitting that their pursuit of perfection had been a terrible mistake. Colonel Warren received a message from a group of young Karathi, asking for human assistance in rebuilding their society, to include the diversity they had lost. They wanted to learn how to be creative and chaotic again. They needed teachers who could show them how to embrace the very traits that had made humanity dangerous to their empire. 1 year after first contact with the Karathi Empire, Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the Great Assembly Hall on the space station orbiting Earth. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered to sign the charter that would create the Galactic Alliance of Free Worlds. The same number of species that the Karathi had once claimed to rule now chose to govern themselves through cooperation rather than domination. The transformation of the galaxy had been faster and more complete than anyone could have imagined. What began as a human resistance to alien conquest had become a movement that freed entire civilizations from centuries of cultural oppression. The rigid order of the Karathi Empire was being replaced by a chaotic democracy that celebrated diversity rather than trying to eliminate it. President Helen Carter delivered the opening speech to the assembled delegates, explaining that the alliance would be based on principles that were the exact opposite of imperial doctrine. Each species would maintain its own culture and government while working together on projects that benefited everyone. No single civilization would have the authority to dictate terms to any other member. Dr. Kevin Park had spent the past year establishing the Galactic Institute for Species Diversity, working with former Karathi subjects to rebuild cultures that had been nearly destroyed by imperial policies. On dozens of worlds, people were rediscovering ancient art forms, traditional sciences, and unique ways of understanding the universe that had been suppressed for generations. The Nethara had returned to their ocean cities and were building new structures that combined their traditional architecture with innovations learned from other species. Their underwater metropolises were becoming centers of learning where aquatic and terrestrial civilizations could work together on projects impossible for either group alone. The Velkorians were using their phase abilities to explore dimensions that other species could not perceive. Their research was revealing new forms of energy and matter that promised to revolutionize galactic technology. But instead of keeping these discoveries secret, they shared their knowledge freely with alliance partners. The Lumari had established a communication network that connected every member world through songs that carried complex information across vast distances. Their music was beautiful to listen to, but also served as a living database that preserved the cultural heritage of dozens of civilizations in harmonic patterns that would never be forgotten. Engineer Lisa Martinez led the Alliance's technological development program, which had produced advances that the Karathi Empire had never achieved despite their centuries of accumulated knowledge. The key was combining innovations from multiple species, rather than forcing everyone to use the same standardized systems. Human kinetic weapons had been improved with Velcorian phase technology to create projectiles that could pass through shields and armor. Nethara architectural principles were applied to spacecraft that could change shape and configuration during flight. Lumari energy manipulation was used to create faster-than-light drives that were more efficient than anything the Karathi had developed. But the most important innovation was not technological but social. The Alliance had learned to harness diversity as a source of strength rather than seeing it as a problem to be solved. Each member species contributed their unique perspective to common challenges, resulting in solutions that no single civilization could have developed alone. Amy Foster had become the Alliance's coordinator for interspecies communication, managing a network that connected hundreds of worlds without depending on any centralized authority. The system was deliberately redundant and chaotic, making it impossible for any future empire to shut down or control galactic communications. The former Karathi territories had been transformed from uniform administrative districts into a patchwork of diverse cultures that were finally free to develop according to their own values and interests. Some species chose to focus on art and philosophy, while others pursued scientific research or technological innovation. The galaxy was becoming more interesting and unpredictable than it had been in centuries. Colonel Steve Warren oversaw the process of integrating former Imperial military forces into Alliance defense fleets. Many Karathi officers had volunteered to serve under the new government, bringing valuable experience and advanced equipment to help protect member worlds from future threats. The transformation had not been without challenges. Some species struggled to remember their own cultures after generations of Imperial conditioning. Others found it difficult to work with civilizations that had very different values and approaches to common problems. But the Alliance was patient and flexible, allowing each member to develop at their own pace. The most surprising development was the request from a group of young Karathi to join the Alliance as equals rather than as conquered subjects. These aliens had grown up hearing stories about the diverse galaxy their empire had tried to control, and they wanted to experience that diversity for themselves. Dr. Park worked with the Karathi volunteers to help them rediscover the creativity and chaos that their species had eliminated through genetic modification. It was a slow and difficult process because the aliens had to learn to think in ways that went against their fundamental nature. But some were beginning to show signs of the innovative thinking that had once made their species great. The Karathi homeworld was being transformed from a sterile crystal city into a more varied and interesting place. Former Imperial citizens were experimenting with art forms that would have been considered illegal under the old regime. They were learning to appreciate music that was not perfectly harmonic, and architecture that did not follow rigid geometric patterns. Admiral Morrison realized that the greatest victory was not the military defeat of the Karathi fleet, but the proof that different approaches to civilization could coexist and strengthen each other. Humans had shown the galaxy that being primitive sometimes meant being free to grow beyond what others thought was possible. The Alliance Charter was signed by representatives of species that had been enemies just months before. Former Imperial subjects stood beside their Karathi overseers as equals in a new government based on cooperation rather than domination. The ceremony was chaotic and beautiful, with each species contributing their own traditions to the celebration. As the assembly concluded, Admiral Morrison looked out at the stars and thought about how much had changed since the Defiance first encountered that alien probe. Humanity had gone from being an isolated species on the edge of known space to becoming the catalyst for galactic transformation. The final irony was that the Karathi had been right about one thing. Humans were primitive compared to their advanced technology and ancient civilization, but they had been completely wrong about what primitive meant. Instead of being a weakness to be corrected, human chaos and creativity had proven to be exactly what the galaxy needed to break free from the stagnation of Imperial rule. The Alliance was not perfect and would face many challenges in the years ahead, but it was alive and growing and changing in ways that no central authority could predict or control. The galaxy belonged to all its inhabitants now, and any future attempt to dominate others would face the combined fury of species that refused to bow down to anyone who thought they knew what was best for everyone. Earth had become the unofficial capital of this new galactic civilization, not because humans had conquered it, but because they had proven that diversity and freedom were stronger than uniformity and control. The primitive species had taught the advanced aliens that there was more than one way to build a successful civilization, and the galaxy would never be the same.